July 1943. The wheat fields of Kursk bend beneath a sky thick with smoke and diesel fumes. A Tiger I tank commander, Hauptmann Werner Hoffmann, peers through the dust-streaked periscope of his Panzerkampfwagen VI. Watching the horizon shimmer in the summer heat, his hands rest on the turret rim. Calloused and steady behind him, the engine rumbles a deep, mechanical heartbeat that once promised invincibility. He has been told since training that this machine, with its 88mm gun and frontal armor thick enough to deflect any Allied shell at range, represents the pinnacle of German engineering. He believes it. The crew believes it. Every man in the Panzerwaffe believes it. Yet as the afternoon light slants across the steppes, something unexpected appears on the distant ridge. Not dozens, but hundreds of tanks, American-built M4 Shermans, shipped across the Atlantic. Rolling east under Soviet flags, they come not in careful formation, but in waves, seemingly endless. Like a tide of steel that refuses to break, Hoffmann counts them through the scope. 30, 50 more, still appearing. His heart, for the first time in 2 years of war, hesitates. The Tiger tank was born from a doctrine of superiority, a weapon designed not merely to fight, but to dominate. In 1942, when the first prototypes emerged from the Henschel factories, German high command envisioned a new kind of warfare. Fewer machines of unmatched quality, overwhelming numerically superior foes. The Tiger's 88mm KWK-36 L56 gun could pierce the armor of any Allied tank at ranges exceeding 2 kilometers. Its frontal armor, 100mm thick and sloped at angles that deflected incoming rounds, made it nearly impervious to most anti-tank weapons of the era, to the men who crewed them. The Tiger was more than a machine. It was a symbol of German technical mastery, the embodiment of the Reich's belief that superior design and discipline could overcome industrial disparity. Propaganda films showed Tigers crushing enemy positions, their commanders standing tall in open hatches, surveying conquered ground. Training manuals spoke of Panzer terror, the psychological effect of a single Tiger rooting entire battalions for the young men selected to crew them. Assignment to a Tiger unit was an honor, a recognition of skill and courage. They were the spearhead, the fist of the Wehrmacht, the proof that quality triumphed over quantity. But war is not waged in theory. It is waged in mud and fuel shortages and broken supply chains. It is waged in the mathematics of production, the cold calculus of replacement rates and logistical endurance. The Tiger I, for all its battlefield prowess, was a mechanical masterpiece built for a war that no longer existed, a war of short, decisive campaigns where individual superiority mattered more than sustained output. Between 1942 and 1945, Germany produced exactly 1,347 Tiger I tanks. Each one required over 300,000 man-hours to construct. Each one consumed fuel at a rate that strained supply lines already stretched from the Atlantic to the Volga. Each one, when lost, represented an irreplaceable void in the panzer divisions. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a different philosophy took shape. The United States did not seek to build the best tank. It sought to build enough tanks. The M4 Sherman, entering production in early 1942, was designed for mass manufacture and ease of repair. Its armor was adequate, not exceptional. Its 75mm gun could penetrate most German tanks at medium range, but struggled against the heavy armor of Tigers and Panthers. Its mechanical reliability, however, was extraordinary. A Sherman could be produced in less than 10,000 man-hours. Its engine, transmission, and suspension were standardized, allowing field repairs with interchangeable parts. Between 1942 and 1945, American factories produced 49,234 Shermans, over 36 times the number of Tigers. They rolled off assembly lines in Detroit, Cleveland, and Los Angeles at a rate of more than 3 per hour at peak production. They were shipped to Britain, The Soviet Union, Free French forces, and American armored divisions across every theater of war, they were not invincible, they were inevitable. The German tankers did not understand this at first. How could they? Their training emphasized individual excellence. The decisive engagement, the knockout blow in early 1943. During the campaigns in North Africa and the Eastern Front, Tiger crews recorded kill ratios that seemed to validate every assumption. 10-1. Sometimes higher at the Battle of Villers-Bocage in June 1944. A single Tiger commanded by SS Obersturmführer Michael Wittmann destroyed over 20 Allied vehicles in 15 minutes. Stopping an entire British armored column, such feats entered legend, were recounted in field reports. Celebrated in military dispatches, the Tiger seemed unstoppable. But legends do not account for attrition. For every engagement won, for every Sherman destroyed. More Shermans arrived at Tiger, lost to mechanical failure, a common occurrence given the tank's complexity, could not be replaced for months. A Sherman destroyed in combat could be replaced within days, sometimes hours. The crews, too, reflected this disparity. German tankers trained for years, honing skills in gunnery and tactics until they achieved near mastery. American tankers trained for months, then learned on the battlefield when a German crew perished. Years of experience vanished when an American crew died. Another took their place. Carrying forward the lessons of the last, the war became not a series of duels, but a war of erosion, where the side that could endure loss and replace it faster than it accumulated would prevail. Werner Hoffmann learned this truth on the approaches to Caen in the hedgerows of Normandy, where his Tiger became both hunter and hunted. The terrain, dense with ancient bocage walls and narrow lanes, negated the Tiger's range advantage. Shermans appeared at close quarters, firing from concealment. Retreating before the Tiger's gun could traverse, one would attack from the flank, drawing fire, while two more maneuvered for side shots where the Tiger's armor was thinner. Hoffmann's crew destroyed 4 Shermans that day, but the 5th round, fired from 80 meters, penetrated the rear engine deck. The Tiger burned Hoffmann and 2 crewmen escaped. The driver and radio operator did not. As he stumbled through smoke toward German lines, Hoffmann looked back and saw, through the haze, more Shermans advancing past the wreck of his tank. Indifferent to its ruin, they had not won through superiority, they had won through presence, through the simple, overwhelming fact of being there, again and again, until resistance collapsed beneath sheer weight. This was not the war he had been promised. This was something else, something his training had never prepared him to face. The irony embedded itself deeper as the war continued. German commanders, confronted with endless waves of Allied armor, began to recognize a fundamental miscalculation. The Tiger's psychological impact, once so potent, dulled with repetition. Allied tank crews, initially terrified of encountering Tigers, learned tactics to compensate: maneuver warfare, combined arms assaults, artillery saturation, air support. The Tiger, designed to strike fear, became instead a high-value target, something to be flanked, bypassed, or destroyed through coordinated effort. American doctrine evolved around this reality. Tank destroyers, artillery, and close air support were called upon to neutralize heavy German armor, while Shermans exploited gaps and maintained momentum. The Sherman's reliability, its ability to keep moving, to stay in the fight longer than its German counterparts, became its greatest asset. Fuel consumption, maintenance intervals, parts availability, these unglamorous factors determined outcomes more than gun caliber or armor thickness. A Tiger immobilized by a broken transmission was worth less than a Sherman with a functioning engine. A Tiger waiting for parts in a depot contributed nothing. A Sherman repaired in the field rejoined the battle within hours. The object that came to symbolize this disparity was not a weapon but a component: the track-linked Sherman tracks, designed for rapid replacement. could be swapped in the field by a crew with basic tools in under an hour. Tiger tracks, heavy and complex, required specialized equipment and often a recovery vehicle to replace broken tracks, immobilized Tigers far more often than enemy fire. In the final year of the war, more Tigers were abandoned due to mechanical failure than were destroyed in combat crews. Ordered to retreat, found themselves unable to move. Forced to demolish their own tanks to prevent capture, the track link, mundane and overlooked, became a metaphor for the broader conflict: American pragmatism versus German perfectionism, endurance versus excellence, the slow, grinding power of industrial capacity against the brittle edge of technological supremacy. And as the war ground on, as German fuel reserves dwindled and factories fell to Allied bombing, the track links piled up in American supply depots while German workshops stood empty, waiting for parts that would never arrive. Historical records document the Tiger's technical dominance with cold precision. A Tiger I could engage and destroy. A Sherman at ranges where the Sherman's gun could not penetrate the Tiger's frontal armor in direct confrontations. The Tiger held every advantage: firepower, protection, optics, crew training, kill-loss ratios. When Tigers were present, favored Germany overwhelmingly, yet these statistics, impressive in isolation, obscure the larger picture. The Tiger represented less than 1% of German tank production. The Sherman represented nearly 60% of all Allied tank production for every Tiger fielded. Germany sacrificed the resources to build multiple Panzer IVs or Stoogie assault guns, vehicles that, while less formidable individually, could be deployed in far greater numbers. The decision to prioritize Tigers embodied a strategic gamble: that qualitative superiority could offset quantitative inferiority, that a handful of superior weapons could achieve what thousands of adequate weapons could not. This gamble failed, not because the Tiger was flawed, but because the war it was designed for, a war of decisive battles and short campaigns, had long since ended. The war that existed in 1943 and 1944 was a war of attrition, of logistics, of which side could sustain losses longer. And in such a war, the side that built 49,234 tanks would always defeat the side that built 1,347. No matter how superior each individual machine might be, the transformation occurred gradually, imperceptibly, like the changing of seasons. German tankers, once confident in their machines and their training, began to speak differently. Letters home, intercepted by Allied intelligence, revealed a shift in tone. The early bravado faded, replaced by weary pragmatism. One letter, written by a panzer officer in late 1944, captured the new reality: we destroy 10 of their tanks, and tomorrow 20 more arrive. We lose one of ours, and it is gone forever. How does one win such a war? The question hung unanswered because there was no answer. Not within the framework of German military doctrine. The concept of Auftragstaktik, mission type, tactics emphasizing initiative, flexibility, assumed that skill and decisiveness could overcome material disadvantage, but skill could not conjure fuel. Initiative could not repair broken transmissions. Flexibility could not replace lost crews. The American approach, derided early in the war as wasteful and crude, revealed its genius through persistence. Shermans were not built to win individual duels. They were built to win campaigns, to maintain pressure, to ensure that no matter how many were destroyed, the advance continued. German tankers found themselves in an impossible position: tactically superior, strategically defeated, capable of winning every engagement yet losing the war. This realization extended beyond the armored forces. Infantrymen observed it, logistics officers calculated it, even high command, insulated by ideology and wishful thinking, could not entirely ignore it. Albert Speer, Reich Minister of Armaments, noted in his memoirs the absurdity of producing Weapons so complex that their impact on the battlefield could not justify their resource cost. He recalled meetings where production figures for Tigers were presented alongside Sherman production estimates. The disparity so vast it seemed almost fictional, yet the Nazi leadership, committed to narratives of German superiority, continued to prioritize quality over quantity, believing until the end that superior willpower and technology could prevail. The Tiger program continued even as fuel shortages left completed tanks immobile in depots, even as Allied bombing crippled rail networks needed to transport them, even as crews trained on machines they would never see in combat. The ideology that birthed the Tiger could not adapt to the reality that destroyed it, and so the factories continued building them, one by one, each a masterpiece of engineering, each ultimately irrelevant in the calculus of industrial warfare. The Shermans, by contrast, were everywhere. Soviet armored units used them on the Eastern Front. British regiments deployed them in Italy and Northwest Europe. Free French forces liberated Paris in Shermans. American armored divisions drove them from Normandy to the Rhine. They were ubiquitous, ordinary, almost boring in their reliability. Crews personalized them, painted names on turrets, adorned them with insignia and slogans. They were not revered. They were used the way a carpenter uses a hammer: functional, dependable, replaceable. This ordinariness became their strength. A Sherman was not a precious resource to be husbanded. It was a tool to be employed if it broke. Another was available if it burned. The crew received a replacement. This mindset, so alien to German military culture, reflected a fundamentally different conception of warfare. The Americans did not seek glory through individual prowess. They sought victory through overwhelming capability, through the application of resources so vast that no amount of enemy skill could offset them. The Sherman embodied this philosophy: mass-produced, standardized, sufficient, not the best enough. Normandy beach fortifications shattered by naval bombardment. Watch the first Shermans roll ashore in June 1944. They came off landing craft in waterproofed configurations, engines coughing salt water, tracks churning sand and shingled. German defenders dug into positions prepared over years, unleashed artillery and anti-tank fire. Shermans burned on the beaches, turrets blown off, hulls gutted by fire within hours. More arrived by the end of D-Day, despite losses exceeding projections. Allied armor outnumbered German defenders. The next day, more Shermans landed, and the next a German response, designed to counterattack and throw the Allies back into the sea, mobilized too slowly, lacked fuel, faced constant air attack. When Panzer Lehr Division finally engaged Allied forces, it had lost over a third of its vehicles to airstrikes before firing a shot. The Tigers that reached the front performed as designed, destroying multiple Shermans per engagement, but they could not be everywhere. They could not hold entire sectors alone. They could not prevent the slow, grinding advance of an armored force that simply would not stop, that absorbed losses and continued moving, pushing inland, expanding the beachhead, bringing more men and more tanks and more supplies until the entire Normandy front became a machine of inexorable momentum. The Tigers won battles. The Shermans won the campaign. By August 1944, the disparity had become existential. German armored divisions, battered in the Falaise pocket, retreated toward the Seine with fewer than half their original strength. Replacement tanks arrived sporadically, often by rail to depots still dozens of kilometers from the front, where they sat awaiting fuel that never came. Meanwhile, American armored divisions refitted and re-equipped in days. Replacement Shermans arrived from depots in England, transported across the Channel, distributed to units in continuous operations. The American logistical system, derided by German officers as inefficient and wasteful, demonstrated a capacity for sustained supply that no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome. A German panzer division, immobilized for lack of fuel, possessed zero combat value regardless of the quality of its tanks, an American armored division. Continuously supplied, maintained operational capability, even with losses. This was the mathematics of modern war. And it favored the side that treated war as an industrial problem requiring industrial solutions. The symbolic power of the Sherman emerged not from its performance, but from its presence. German civilians, watching Shermans roll through their cities in 1945, saw not fearsome weapons, but manifestations of a reality they had been conditioned to deny, that American industrial capacity dwarfed Germany's, that the Reich's vaunted technology could not compensate for material inferiority, that the war had been lost not on battlefields, but in factories and shipyards and oil refineries. The Sherman, ordinary and unimpressive, represented something more terrifying than any tiger: the sheer, crushing weight of democratic industrial mobilization. The power of a society that could produce tens of functional weapons while maintaining civilian production, that could absorb losses and replace them, that could sustain a war across oceans and continents indefinitely. The tiger represented the last gasp of a military aristocracy that believed superiority of design and spirit could transcend material reality. The Sherman represented the future. Mass production, standardization, the triumph of adequate sufficiency over bespoke excellence. Werner Hoffmann survived the war. He spent the final months in a hospital, recovering from burns, then in a prisoner of war camp in Belgium, then finally repatriated to a Germany that no longer existed in any form he recognized. He never cooed another tiger in interviews decades later. He spoke of the machine with a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. It was the finest tank in the world, he said. And it made no difference. He described watching American convoys after the surrender. Endless columns of trucks and jeeps and Shermans, rolling past ruined German cities. And feeling not anger, but a kind of awe. We thought we were fighting soldiers. He recalled, we were fighting factories. This realization, common among German veterans, carried a melancholic recognition that the war had been decided long before the first tiger rolled off the assembly line. Decided in the productive capacity of nations, in the ability to mobilize resources and sustain effort, in the unglamorous work of shipyards and steel mills and the women and men who labored in them. The tiger was a magnificent machine. It was also an irrelevance, a symbol of a military doctrine made obsolete by the very war it sought to dominate. The numbers tell a story that no amount of individual heroism can alter. Of the 1,347 tigers produced, fewer than half saw combat. The remainder were lost to mechanical failure, abandoned for lack of fuel, destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture, or never deployed due to logistical constraints. Of those that reached the battlefield, the average operational lifespan was measured in weeks. The tiger's complexity, its greatest strength in theory, became its fatal weakness in practice. Each tiger required a logistics tale of spare parts, specialized tools, recovery vehicles, and trained maintenance personnel that the Wehrmacht could not provide. By 1944, German industry could barely keep pace with Sherman production from a single American factory. The 49,234 Shermans represented an investment not just in tanks but in an entire system: supply chains, training programs, maintenance infrastructure, replacement pipelines. This system, built over years of preparation and refined through experience, ensured that Allied armored forces maintained operational capability regardless of losses. The German system, strained by overextension and strategic bombing, collapsed under its own complexity. The tiger, the apex of that system, could not function without it, and so the finest tank of the war became a footnote, remembered for what it represented rather than what it achieved. The irony deepened in the post-war analysis. Military historians, studying the campaigns of 1944, 1945, concluded that the Tiger program had been a strategic mistake, that the resources devoted to producing 1,347 Tigers could have produced over 10,000 Panzer IV medium tanks or 15,000 Stu G3 assault guns vehicles, less capable individually but sufficient in numbers to contest Allied advances far more effectively. The decision to prioritize Tigers represented a fundamental misunderstanding of modern warfare, a belief that technological superiority could substitute for industrial capacity. This belief, rooted in pre-industrial conceptions of warfare where the quality of individual warriors determined outcomes, proved lethally anachronistic in an age of mass armies and industrial production. The Sherman, designed without illusions, built to be good enough rather than perfect, reflected a more mature understanding that war between industrial powers would be won by the side that could sustain production and maintain supply, that could absorb losses and continue fighting, that could translate economic capacity into military capability over years of sustained effort. The Americans built a tank for the war they were fighting. The Germans built a tank for the war they wished they were fighting. The difference determined the outcome. Yet the Tiger's legacy persisted, distorted through the lens of nostalgia and incomplete understanding in popular memory. The Tiger became synonymous with German military prowess, its fearsome reputation preserved in films and documentaries and the accounts of veterans who encountered it. The Sherman, by contrast, received little glory, remembered more for its weaknesses than its strengths. Its crew's nickname, Ronson, after the lighter tagline, "Light's First Time," every time highlighting its vulnerability rather than its ubiquity. This narrative inversion, where the tank that lost the war receives admiration while the tank that won it receives derision, reveals something essential about how we remember conflict. We romanticize the exceptional, the extraordinary, the machine that embodied the ideal even as it failed. We overlook the ordinary, the sufficient, the machine that succeeded not through brilliance, but through persistence. The Sherman won no glory because it did not seek glory, it sought victory, through the prosaic means of showing up day after day, in numbers the enemy could not match. This is not the stuff of legend, it is the stuff of history. The track link, that humble component, rusting now in museums and private collections, tells the true story, not the story of duels between steel giants, of heroic crews and desperate last stands, but the story of supply lines and production schedules, of factory workers and logistics officers, of the unglamorous truth that wars are won by those who can maintain their armies in the field, who can replace losses, who can endure longer than their enemies. The Tiger represented the old way, the belief that superior weapons wielded by superior soldiers could overcome numerical disadvantage. The Sherman represented the new reality, that industrial capacity and logistical endurance mattered more than individual superiority. This shift, from artisanal to industrial warfare, from quality to quantity, marked a transformation in military affairs as profound as any in history. The Tiger was the last gasp of military elitism. The Sherman was the first breath of modern total war, where entire economies mobilized, where civilians became combatants through their labor, where victory went not to the bravest or the most skilled, but to the most productive. In the end, 1,347 Tigers met 49,234 Shermans, and the outcome was never in doubt, not because the Tiger was flawed, it was magnificent, not because the Sherman was superior, it was adequate, but because the war was not a contest between machines, it was a contest between systems, between philosophies, between visions of how modern warfare should be waged. The Germans chose excellence and lost. The Americans chose sufficiency and won. This choice, more than any battle or campaign, determined the course of the Second World War, and shaped the conflicts that followed the lesson. Stark and unforgiving, echoes through the decades, in industrial warfare. Enough is better than perfect. Persistence outlasts brilliance. And the side that can endure loss and replace it faster than it accumulates will always prevail. The wheat fields of Kursk are quiet now, the smoke long dispersed. The machines rusted into the earth or hauled away to scrapyards, but the truth they revealed remains. Cold and mathematical and undeniable, Werner Hoffmann understood it in those final months, watching the endless American convoys. Feeling the weight of industrial might arrayed against him, the finest tank in the world made no difference, because the war was never about tanks. It was about factories, about resources, about the capacity to sustain effort until the enemy broke. The Tiger was a masterpiece, the Sherman was a system, and in the crucible of total war, systems defeat masterpieces every time. This is the irony that changed everything, that the superior weapon lost, that excellence surrendered to adequacy, that the tank built to dominate was overwhelmed by the tank built to endure. The Tiger roared once and fell silent. The Sherman rumbled on, unremarkable and unstoppable, carrying forward not through superiority, but through simple, grinding, inevitable presence. And when the guns finally ceased and the smoke cleared, it was the ordinary machines, the adequate weapons, the sufficient tools that stood victorious in the ruins, bearing witness to a truth older than warfare itself, that in the long struggle, endurance matters more than brilliance, that persistence defeats perfection, and that those who can outlast the storm will inherit the world it leaves behind.